think that's what's really cool about these books, is that you could go through, see a couple names you recognize or maybe some that you don't, pick them to read, and it could almost, not like a coffee table book, but it kind of could be like that, where you're just reading a few letters or a few speeches every now and then.
America's 250th coming up, you reflect about like what this country is all about, and I think that these texts all like really, really embody what the idea of America was supposed to be.
Let's go beyond the first page. Let's go beyond the first page.
Welcome back, Second Pagers. This is Beyond the First Page podcast with siblings Phoebe, Phil, and Isaac. I'm Phoebe.
I'm Phil.
I'm Isaac.
And this is Club Meeting 62. It's the overview to Chapter 3. And in Chapter 3, we are doing a collaboration with the Brooklyn Public Library's Bookmobile, because they are doing a tour through the 13 original colonies. We are going to have Dawn back on to talk with us about some of these readings. And they are doing a Bookmobile Tour that's called We the People in the Library of America Bookmobile Tour. And again, as I mentioned, they're going through the 13 original colonies, providing a certain number of texts, original texts that are surrounding the founding of America to people in different locations throughout those colonies. And so we're very excited to read a couple of those texts and talk with Dawn about them and talk with each other and all of you about them as well. And so we're going to talk about three different things. The first one that many people have heard about is Common Sense. It's by Thomas Paine. You've probably had to read it in some sort of government class in high school. I know I did, and I think both of you guys did as well. We're also going to read three different things from American Women's Suffrage, Voices from the Long Struggle for the Vote, which is obviously about women's suffrage and feminism. And then the last one is a compilation of works, and it is called Black Writers of the Founding Era, and we are reading three different texts within that book as well, and we'll get into more specifics as we talk about each of those. This is a bit unorthodox, as you can already hear from my description, and we thought this was a really cool opportunity to collaborate with a movement that is happening, that is promoting books and promoting reading, and also promoting reading something a little bit more revolutionary and inspiring versus just like fiction, which is what we're normally talking about on the podcast. So very cool event. We'll get you the details through different posts on Instagram. And as we talk about it, we'll try to talk more about what this organization is doing. So very excited to read those kind of unorthodox texts with all of you and expose you to something maybe you haven't read since high school or ever. And the reason we decided to do this was, one, we had talked to Don previously on the podcast for the Odyssey book, and he had mentioned that he was doing this. We thought it was a really cool opportunity, but it's in conjunction with the 250th birthday of America, which is why we've decided to read all these kind of American Revolution texts. And so without further ado, we like to discuss each of the three that we've chosen. And so I'll go first. Mine was the Women's Suffrage book, and we picked three different texts from there. The first one was letters from Abigail Adams to John Adams while he was at the Continental Congress. And very quickly, essentially, the gist of the letter is that she is asking him to not forget women in the Constitution and creating the Constitution. And
which I think is really interesting because obviously he totally forgot women,
yes.
As preceded by the rest of the 200 years of American women's
yes.
suffrage.
Yes, he kind of laughed her off. And so then, women's suffrage had to
He actually
happen
didn't laugh her off. He just didn't answer her, which goes to her
which she also
letter.
Complains about
She's
in
the book.
So since you haven't written me, I'm going to write you again.
Yeah, and I think so that was interesting. And
So
I think
things
obviously
haven't
just
changed
really,
in 250 years.
Yeah, 100%. I think it was interesting just because you're seeing a correspondence between a future president and his wife. The second reading that we did, and that's just a couple pages, so very cool, quick read. I think that's what's really cool about these books is that you could go through, see a couple names you recognize or maybe some that you don't, pick them to read, and it could almost, not like a coffee table book, but it kind of could be like that where you're just reading a few letters or a few speeches every now and then. The second one we read was Ernestine's Roses. She gave a speech to the second National Women's Rights Convention, and I think this speech was one of the most compelling things I read, at least for this chapter that we did.
It was very good in the fact that it was easy to follow, but at the same time, like, all of her points were very logical and very much meeting them on their own turf of just like, oh, you say we can't do this because this, well, here's why you're wrong, which I thought was cool.
Yeah. But I think a very, still a lot could be taken and put into today, and a lot of those arguments could be being made, or similar veins of an argument could be being made.
Yeah, and take out like women and insert, your choice of the minority. Very compelling. And that was 1851, just to give a year of context there. And then the last one I thought was very interesting. It was titled "The Legal Conditions of Indian Women." It was a writing by Alice Cunningham Fletcher in 1888, and it was an argument that was posed during a inaugural meeting of the International Women's Council in D.C. And so that's why she was speaking about this. She was a white woman who lived with the native population. I think she was like an amateur anthologist or something of that nature. But she essentially wrote about how I think white people, and even today, the misconception I think would be that Indian women were similar to Black women, like kind of had the lowest amount of rights, civil rights, but in fact, Indian women, Native American women, before white people came to America, had many rights and were equally treated to men, and if not more, better treated. And so she outlines a lot of those daily household ways that women were equal or even above men in Native American culture. And how kind of now with white people imposing their laws on the Native population, how that was changing and affecting Native women. So I thought that was also very interesting and a huge part of the American history, right? So I think a very apt choice on our end to read about and discuss.
I think we'll have a pretty good conversation with this one because she has I would say like a checkered past a little bit maybe. Or like she is arguing for this, but also like lobbied to pass the Dawes Act, which really screwed Native Americans. So she went in with some good intentions and then like kind of did some also things that like she thought maybe she was helping and really ended up not helping. And I did do some research. She recognized that like armchair quarterback. She was like, wow, this was like really bad. But she also did a lot of good work preserving their culture and promoting their culture. I think the other thing that was cool about this one is I read this speech as an argument to be like, look, white women, you are shooting far too low. This is what you could, like, this has already proven to exist and, like, be achievable. Like, this is the equality we should be shooting for. And was using the native women's status in their own communities as that, like, benchmark that white women should be shooting for. So, kind of interesting there as well.
Yeah.
So definitely I thought these were the most interesting to me, unsurprisingly, of the three things that we read. I think that something that really surprised me was the wittiness and the eloquence of all of the women writers. I read some of the other texts that were in this compilation of writings, and I thought that they were so well delivered, for people who could be really embittered. I think women bore it well in these texts. And excited to talk with you guys about them. And then Phil, did you want to talk about common sense? I think that's next
Yeah,
up.
I think that's a good jumping off point for people who could be embittered because Thomas Paine was quite embittered. So basically, Common Sense was written by Thomas Paine, who actually was like a very recent immigrant to the United States. 1774, he came over from England. And there had been a couple of articles actually by legal scholars in England that had sort of been written to the common people of England about how this should be, like America should be its own independent nation. But he started writing Common Sense in 1775, and he was intending to publish it in the Philadelphia newspaper, but it got like way too long, and so he published it as a pamphlet. And I think Benjamin Rush, who was like a famous newspaper, I'm not sure, but I feel like I've heard the name Benjamin Rush before. He basically published it and then took all the money of the proceeds that came to it. But that's a little besides the point. Basically, it was written to the common people as a defense or as an argument for independence. It was very much, we should not be a vassal state of Britain anymore.
Yeah.
And this was a very radical, not like a very radical idea in sight, but a very radical publication. And I think personally, insofar as like the writing, I thought it was extremely interesting because out of anything that we read, easily the poorest arguments, but insofar as compelling, I think probably the most compelling. It really took somebody at like where they were and their every single day life and stirred emotion. And I think he did that extremely well. I think that his arguments for government and what the nation should look like, he really smartly proposed an idyllic nation that was super unrealistic. But it's not really compelling to say that we're probably going to end up with a legislature that's going to be really slow and never pass anything. But so he was like, we can govern ourselves. This is what we can do. And he faced a lot of flack on the back end of it by actually John Adams sort of wrote that it was like, this is like, he outlines this good system of government that's really not
That's
doable.
idealistic. Yeah.
But it did the job, obviously. It
Right.
rallied people. It showed them that, it gave them the idea that things could be better. And I thought that was very interesting. And I think that because I had never read Common Sense, I've
You
read
hadn't?
like the Federalist. No. I've read the Federalist Papers, which are much more like logic based. I thought that this was like very different and a little bit different than what I was expecting as well. So I thought that was very cool.
So I think Common Sense was my favorite of these. I agree with Phil that it was more like passion based, I think, than maybe logic based. But I think at the time, like, it was pretty logical still. Like, just they didn't know. Like, why wouldn't, if you're starting fresh, why would you not shoot for it all? And that was his argument,
Right.
and that's what I really liked. I think the most interesting part was his argument for why now. Like, his argument of the colonies are just big enough to float an army to actually fight and make a difference, but just small enough that they can remain unified and not everyone has their own agenda.
Right.
In that like time period was very, very important for his argument of like, this needs to happen now or we're going to grow too much and then not be able to band together and fight against this with
Defeat
one common
England.
goal.
You guys had a different reaction, I think, than I did. I don't necessarily know.
You
it
were
spoke to me
underwhelmed.
as much. Yeah, I think I was very. It was hard for me to read. Actually, the fact that it was written for the common people surprises me. The common people in America were quite smart back then. I
You
guess
should read it,
'cause-
not listen to it.
Yeah, you shouldn't listen to
Listen.
it.
Well, I did then read like what is common sense about, and then I listened again, and I could pick up his point, like in the layman's terms, picked up the points better. But yeah, excited for that discussion. Obviously, that's the most well known. And like you guys said, I had assumed you had read it, and I think a lot of people probably are like, oh yeah, common sense. But then actually sitting down to read it, very different. So excited for that conversation as well. And then the last book club meeting that we'll be having we will be talking about Black authors from the founding era and the 3 different texts that we decided to read from that. So, Isaac, I'll let you outline those quickly for us.
Yeah, and I believe the book is Black Writers of the Founding Era if you're searching for it. But this
Black
was one of
Writers
those
of the
ones
Founding
that
Era.
was very difficult to find, to get your hold on. I even tried to buy a hard copy of it, and the multiple places that I was trying to buy it would like let me check out and then be like, oh, actually, we don't have this. So
As
I
a
think you guys
plug,
will...
if you live in the original 13 colonies, catch the Bookmobile because
Yeah.
you can
True.
get it for free.
You can get it.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think you guys will find this helpful. We kind of like picked some good ones. The first one was the petition of Absalom Jones, which we found out a little bit later is not actually in the book, but he has a lot of other writings in the book as well. This guy was a total badass. He was born into slavery, was freed he worked and bought his wife's freedom first and then kept petitioning the man who had ownership of him and finally got himself freed. Then he started his own segment of the Methodist Church because the current segment that existed then was just like purely racist. And he was like, well, I'm just going to start my own segment of it. And then they were just like, it got so big and successful that they had to let him in and like sort of do his own thing underneath the banner of the Methodist Church still. So totally awesome. But his main thing he fought against most of his life was the Fugitive Slave Act of 1793. We can go into the history of that in our episode, but go look it up, read about it. It's obviously anything to do with slavery is fucking horrible. One of the things I liked about all these was like these are people that you don't really ever hear about that were just doing such amazing work, and we can highlight that a little bit at the end too. The next one was a petition from Belinda Sutton to receive a pension from her English. So he was a British guy when the revolution started, ran to Nova Scotia because he was a loyalist, and in his will he freed all the people that he had enslaved when he passed away. And from that freedom, she argued that like she deserves a pension of his estate because of all the work she did. Really well written and cool to see just the kind of like smaller court everyday happenings of these people trying to like make their lives better after getting out of slavery. And then something really awful, it was awarded to her and then only 2 payments were made and never paid again, even though she kept fighting to get the rest.
So she kept petitioning. So there's a ton
After
of
they
Belinda
stopped paying
Sutton
her.
petitions, which is crazy.
And then the last one is one of the first, and if not like one of the only supposed, I think there is some controversy around this piece of work, but enough scholars accept it as at like face value that it is taught and read as a real firsthand account of a man that was captured in Africa, brought over, enslaved, eventually freed, just his life, and it's a recounting of his life.
Actually written by him.
And written by him, yeah. So just a crazy story. So it will be interesting discussion to see like kind of what I could understand why there is conspiracy around this because of how sort of downplayed it is. I don't know if that's the right term, so I'm not trying to be offensive necessarily if that's what it is, but it doesn't come off as harsh as what I was expecting going into it. But still a really cool read.
I think it's the way it's written and it's very matter of fact. We can get into talking about it more.
Yeah.
I see what you're saying though.
But and this is the longest one of the works, but I think all 3, you could read in 30 minutes. And all of these well worth your time.
I like that we picked this because it is a different, it's a direct accounting of an enslaved person's life. And I think it's just different than the other things that we're reading for this chapter. So it was important to include.
As I was doing some research too on this, a shout out to our last season. It is mentioned in James, and he like questions Venture Smith's
It's very-
accounting validity
Account.
in James.
That's very cool.
Interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely excited to talk. I think this is I want to reiterate what we're doing because I think it's a bit confusing and I don't know that I was eloquent at the beginning, but we are taking, so the Brooklyn Bookmobile is doing a tour of the 13 original colonies. They're handing out these texts in conjunction with the Library of America. And so the three of the texts are Common Sense, the Women's Suffrage book that we spoke about, and Black Writers of the Founding Era. And from those three, so we're going to do 3 episodes talking about those 3 texts. From those 3 texts, Common Sense is a standalone pamphlet, so we'll read the whole thing and talk about it. From the women's suffrage, voices of the suffrage movement, we picked those 3 letters we discussed, and then from Black Writers of the Founding Era, we picked the 3 writings that Isaac discussed, and we're going to talk about those for an episode. So 3 different episodes talking about those 3 texts because of America's 250th birthday. And because our friend John, who was on the podcast, is doing this tour in conjunction with the Library of America across the 13 original colonies. And so, as I said, I think it's an ambitious chapter for sure. Definitely the most ambitious thing that we've done on the podcast, as far as like just in the intellectual discussions that are that are warranted around all of these writings. So very excited to talk more with you guys and get your perspective.
I have gotten into activism in the probably last year and a half, more so than I ever have. I actually read the news or listen to podcasts for the news. I've gone to a couple protests and marches and stuff, which is really cool. It's cool to be a part of, but I think that reading these fires you up once again, because this is what activism really looks like. All these people who are seemingly no names outside of Thomas Paine, because he gets mentioned in American high schools, that all had tremendous impact at some level for the cause that they were fighting for. And I think, America's 250th coming up, you reflect about what this country is all about. And I think that these texts all really, really embody what the idea of America was supposed to be.
Yeah.
These are all people who saw something that was wrong and had a better solution for it and did something about it. But it's really cool.
Yeah.
I think this will be the coolest thing we do. I hope we can pull it off.
Yeah. I think one of the things when I was reading every single one of these that I really loved was the specificity of it.
Yeah.
I really liked it, especially the women's. Well, the petitions, obviously, they're going to be specific. They're petitioning for a certain thing. But the women's argument was we want this. We want exactly this. I think that it's unsurprising that no one cares about climate change when the radical call was, watch out, in 100 years, it's going to be 2 degrees hotter. Congrats on that message. That is the most uninspiring message of catastrophic doom I've ever heard in my life. And I think that, these are examples of petitions and sort of calls to action that are inspiring, and I think that that's really cool as well.
It definitely is. No, I'm excited to hear how excited you guys are and how much this inspired you. I hope it inspires our listeners too. And this is your bi-weekly reminder to call someone that you love, tell them that you love them, tell them about a good book or good reading. Hopefully it's something from Beyond the First Page collab with the Brooklyn Bookmobile and the Library of Congress. And until we talk again, stay classy second pagers. We'll
Let's
see you
go
later.
beyond the first
Bye, guys.
page.
See you guys.